Out of everything you have studied this semester in history of China, what is your one takeaway? What is the one thing you felt that you learned the most?
Well, Nick, that's a really interesting question. Throughout this semester, the one thing that I have to take away from history of China is the values that have been drilled into the minds of the Eastern and Western civilizations. These values have been there since the beginning, and they are a huge factor in what has happened recently.
So you're talking about all these values and the East and West comparison. What is one example of this being prevalent in Chinese history?
My main example of values between the East and West being very different is it found in the Zhou dynasty during the 100 schools of thoughts. One of the main leaders of one of these ideologies is Confucius. He was a peasant and a teacher, and one of his main goals was to teach everyone the negative golden rule so that no problems would come across in later times as they did. The negative golden rule says, don't do to others what you don't want done to you. This is basically saying that if I don't want someone to punch me, then I'm not going to punch someone else. Whereas another ideologist that came around during the same around time of the 100 schools of thoughts is Jesus, and he was also a peasant and a teacher. And he was famous after his death for the golden rule, which is treat others the way you want to be treated. And this caused a lot of problems within China when the West and China meet, because the West had this idea that if you did not believe in Jesus Christ as your Savior, you would go to hell. So the West's idea of the golden rule was thinking, well, I don't want to go to damnation, so neither would anyone else, so let me teach them the difference. This caused a lot of problems within the West between their values. My second example of these values and how they are used to help both the East and the West is economy. The West has used its economy for the past 500 or 600 years to colonize other countries, including countries in Africa and North and South America, and also in Asia, like India, with the British East India Trade Company. They've been using their money to colonize and become a world power, whereas the East during times were doing Han Wudi, who was fortifying the Great Wall to keep out their enemies, and Kangxi, who was taking his voyages into the Indian Ocean not to colonize but to trade and to learn about other countries so that their country can evolve. The West has also been using a lot of their money to publicize Christianity, whereas China isn't in the mood to publicize their religions. They want to keep them to themselves. Recently, the West has been using their money to help the Iraqi war, the recession, and the debt to China. A lot of these are taking up so much money that the rising debt in American society is huge. Whereas the East, with their communistic ideas that have recently evolved since 1949 in the People's Republic of China, they're constantly on the rise, bringing 400 million people out of poverty so far. They're also becoming the #2 superpower and have recently passed Japan, which is a huge deal for China because it's never been the #1 superpower for a very long time. These values show the difference between East and West and how they react in recent times to worldly situations. This is something that the West doesn't really teach you about Chinese history. They more teach you about the things that have gone wrong within China, and the East with their communistic ideas or anything really. But actually it's really interesting how the East is just evolving so much and doing such a great job with their country and how they are working their society and bringing 400 million people out of debt, whereas the West is more worried about their superpower and they're getting into wars that aren't even worth getting into just so that they can show that they're #1. Whereas the East doesn't really care about that. They're more worried about their future generations, which I personally think is the biggest takeaway from history of China.